Hello, welcome to our Q&A session for our governance webinar on success in the NDIS market. Community Business Bureau acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community, and pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Jane Arnott. I'm the General Manager for Consulting and Business Services at CBB, and I'm joined for this Q&A by my colleague, Dr. Ellen Schuler, who you would have seen on a number of the management webinars in this series.
Hello.
We're going to go through some of the questions that we've been asked around governance, and we'll be drawing on our knowledge and our experience of working with NDIS providers, but obviously caution you that we do not speak on behalf of the NDIS or the NDIS Commission. So where you need official advice, please do contact them directly. So Ellen, first question to you, which I know you get asked an awful lot. Should we become a registered NDIS provider?
Okay, that's a very loaded question. And my answer, it depends. It depends on a really range of factors. It depends on what services and supports you're actually wanting to provide or you're providing, what access to the market you desire, and also like your location. You know, are you more in remote or rural locations or more in a metropolitan area? What are your customer segments and how would it actually fit within your mission? You know, if you do not register, you exclude certain parts of the market, you're excluding more vulnerable people, and does that really fit with your mission? And you really need to consider that carefully. You know, audits comes with costs and it comes with obligations. I see it as a very positive thing. We had a lot of really good feedback from providers who said, you know, that the audit process has actually made us into, or helped us to become a better organization, because it really focuses your efforts into continuous improvement. And I think, you know, getting an audit report means you get an external view of your organization and you can actually learn a lot. And that is really worthwhile. So, you know, yes, it comes with costs and obligations, but it actually creates great value for every organization. But just, however, keep in mind that having a good audit or a good report does not necessarily mean everything is okay in the organization. Yeah. So, you know, if you don't have complaints or incidents in your organization, doesn't mean, you know, everything is going to plan. Maybe they're not recorded. That could be a reason. So don't over rely on the audit, but see it as an opportunity.
Great, thanks, Ellen.
I have a question to you, Jane. So does the board composition actually have to change when you are operating in the NDIS?
Well, obviously, that will depend a lot on your starting point. It's important to have a skills-based board, I think, within an NDIS context. There's obviously a lot of commercial aspects involved in running an NDIS service, so making sure you've got those kind of skills on your board. And, you know, depending on where you are currently, thinking a lot about your understanding of the NDIS business model. So if you're new to the NDIS, you really need to make sure you understand that business model, but also that you have the right mindset in terms of being person-centered. So again, if that's something that's new to you, or you're new to providing community services, or perhaps you've been providing a different type of service, really having that person-centered focus combined with that understanding the business model and that commercial sense will really help you to manage and plan your strategic direction. It's really important that board members understand the quality and safeguarding provisions under the NDIS, and they are specific to the NDIS. So, you know, if you're an aged care provider, for example, you still need to understand the NDIS rules as well. And depending on the nature of the service you're providing, you might need some clinical competence on your board as well. So obviously, if you're providing some personal care type services or behaviour support, so those kind of things that are more risky in terms of the vulnerability of the clients that you're working with and the kinds of services you're providing, it's good to have that clinical focus on your board.
Definitely.
I think the other thing, which is something that I know you care a lot about, Ellen, but as we all do, but it's a real passion of yours, is making sure that you have that voice of the customer on the board, and really thinking about how you engage customers either directly on your board or have a means for them to be heard, so that the board is really getting that customer perspective, not just the story they're being told by management, which may be accurate, but it's very easy to ignore customers and focus on the governance, the broader governance issues.
And not just the insight of one customer, because we often have parents actually on boards, which is really great and really valuable, but they often bring their own perspective in. So it is really important to look at the whole customer perspective. Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked a bit just then around needing to understand the NDIS. You keep track of what's going on in the NDIS in a lot of detail. How do board members keep informed of what's happening? Because it does change a fair bit.
It changes a lot. NDIS is built the plane is being built while it's flying. So there are constant changes. And as a board, it is incredibly important to stay on top of these changes, because it can change your business model really rapidly. And it also can change your obligation as a provider. First of all, as a board, you really need to be on top of the NDIS Code of Conduct, really important, even if you are not a registered provider. Yeah. So having training in regards to compliance in the induction program is incredibly important, but also ongoing training for your board in regards to NDIS matters, like NDS, the peak body of disability service providers, has really good training programs, for instance, for preventing abuse and neglect. They have their zero tolerance program. It's a series of webinars which I highly recommend for boards, because the board has to set the tone from the top and really communicate what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior within the organization. As I said, it is also very important to stay up to date with what's happening, what's happening within the NDIS, but also what's happening around in your landscape, around with the competitors. How are other competitors reacting to what's happening around them? And I actually recommend that the board nominates a person who actually watches the landscape a bit and may report on a regular basis. The minister of the NDIS announces major changes, so someone could stay on top of this, or you could actually invite speakers on a regular basis. You could also watch our webinar with your board. As I said, to invite speakers to your board.
And it's worth following our blog as well, because Ellen does
definitely
write on CBB's website quite regularly about some of the NDIS changes. So do sign up for that and follow that. So in terms of the kind of board mindset and business model, how does working under the NDIS change the way that the board needs to kind of their mindset and the model that they follow?
Look, if you provide supports under the NDIS, it is a fee-for-service model, so you really need a commercial mindset, because you will only get paid if you're actually delivering a service and for the time you're delivering a service. And it is very administration heavy, and there are a lot of things organizations do, and luckily they do this, but a lot of tasks they actually do not get paid for. So you really need to have a commercial outlook and understand your costs and keeping oversight over your costs. And you need to be a bit more agile, because it's really tricky in the NDIS to forecast your staff member levels. So you need, as a board, you actually need to give your management team the flexibility to be flexible and to react to growing demand, for instance. Or if a service doesn't have the necessary demand, you might have to come to the conclusion that you're actually overstaffed in certain areas. So there needs to be flexibility and empowerment to make real-time decisions. As a board, you also need to have a really good risk oversight, really, really important. Again, you need to communicate the behaviors to expect to the organization. of the organization, and you need to find the right level of having oversight, but also supporting your management team, because it is hard to operate within the NDIS, and you need flexibilities, you need to adapt, and so your CEO needs support, and the board really needs to be there to support the CEO in those matters.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the organisations that we're working with through this programme are small businesses, so I think really just thinking about, you've got your business, but also having, again, that values mindset and that inclusion mindset for people with a disability, that it really is about providing a quality service to the community, as well as, running your business and providing, a revenue. Okay,
I have a question for you, Jane. That's a question we actually get a fair bit lately. So what level of detail and what sort of things should actually be should be included in board reports of an NDIS provider?
So from a governance perspective, we talk quite a bit in that webinar about the quality and safety requirements, and the next webinar in the governance series is about, it covers risks as well. So it's really important from a governance perspective that you're on top of the kind of things that would indicate that there's risks or issues going on in the organisation. So really monitoring complaints, incidents and reportable incidents and how they're being resolved is an important part of that governance function. From a commercial perspective, we recommend that you're getting some information on your sales pipeline and your trends, so month to month and year on year, how are your sales tracking, and obviously thinking about the audit that you have, what are the outcomes of the audit, and that could be internal audits that you might be doing if you're a larger organisation, but also your external audit. We advocate for a culture of continuous improvement, so we'd like boards to be across what improvement initiatives might be going on, and also thinking about the workforce issues. So I know one of the organisations we've worked with, we did quite a lot of work around some of their HR metrics to look at what are the indicators from a workforce perspective that might indicate that there are some risks from that perspective. So that could be, high staff turnover, high levels of unfilled shifts or unplanned leave, that kind of stuff. So look for those indicators that might come up initially that signal that there might be something going wrong down the line. So particularly things like your employee engagement tends to reflect your customer service. So very engaged employees tend to deliver better service to customers, whereas those that are unhappy tend to, not provide the same quality of service because they're just not as committed to the business and the services that you're providing. So looking out for those kind of indicators to help you understand what future risks you might be needing to manage. And there's obviously all of the usual things around finances and policies and strategy and culture, etc. I think one of the things that we've noticed that's really important is really looking at things from a trends perspective and in the context of your organisation. So you might be tracking things like complaints over time or the number of unfilled shifts over time, but you should also be looking at against the volume of services that you're providing. So you might see a much higher level of unfilled shifts, but actually if your unfilled shifts have gone up by 10%, but your service has gone up by 20 to 30%, then that's actually probably showing that you're improving in terms of the number of shifts that you're filling. So thinking about that kind of relationship over time and against volume is really important. And also checking things like if you do see increases in areas that might give you cause to concern, such as an increase in complaints or incidents, investigate that a bit more, because it could be a real increase or it could be that people are reporting more. So if you've done training around complaints and incidents, you probably expect, if that training was effective, to see the numbers going up because people are reporting and recording that more. And
that's a good thing.
And it's a good thing.
So having a high number does not always mean it's something is going wrong in the organisation.
And that's where following through and how they've been resolved and what's changed, not just for that individual, but if you need to make systemic changes, is really important as well.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've mentioned audit a couple of times.
Okay, yeah.
What happens when somebody gets audited? What do people expect?
Yes. So as a board, you can't always sit back and let the organisation deal with it. As mentioned in the webinar, there are two types of audit. There's a certification audit and the verification audit. For the verification audit, that's only a desktop audit, so the board will not have an involvement in this directly. However, you should ask after the audit has been concluded what actually the outcome was and what measures the organisation is taking to improve on those findings. For the certification audit, the board involvement is a little bit bigger because the board members could actually be interviewed as well. Also, the auditor will definitely look at the documentation of your board meetings. What's on your agenda. Are you actually discussing risk on a regular basis? Are you actually discussing how the organisation is preventing abuse and neglect? So your board papers, your communication, your board reports, what you've already mentioned. So they will look at indicators in the organisation that you are doing everything you can to provide quality services and to prevent harm and abuse. And that you're actually also having an oversight of the systems in the management system in the organisation.
Good stuff. Thank you.
So our last question. So what are the common governance mistakes, Jane?
Okay, well, we've been working in this space for a few years now, so this is kind of based on our experience of what we've observed, and working with small organisations right through to some very large ones. I would say that really for boards, not investing in understanding the NDIS market is probably the biggest mistake and risk. And that can go a number of different ways. So not really understanding what the opportunities might be in the market. So in the webinar series, both this and the management webinars, we've been talking about the potential size of the market, the level of underutilisation of plans. So really for the board to understand what the market opportunities are, I think is really important. Perhaps not really, again, that lack of understanding about what the implications are for the organisation. So really seeing how it impacts on business model, the compliance requirements that come along with it, so they can really get that sense of what the opportunities are, but also what the pressures or benefits might be for the organisation. And again, all those regulatory requirements, I mean, there is a lot in there. Some of them are very specific around governance. So boards really do need to be across that. You mentioned this earlier, Ellen, when we were talking about the importance of the consumer voice. We have seen in some organisations where boards do bring lived experience, which is fantastic, but they perhaps assume that their lived experience is representative of all lived experience. So really thinking that if you do have lived experience on your board, how do you make sure that you're also bringing in other people's perspectives? Because it is, unfair and inappropriate to assume that every person with a disability has the same experience, or that every carer of somebody with a disability has the same experience. So really making sure that you get that breadth of lived experience on your board. And a lot of the stuff around operating in the NDIS can be quite stressful for organisations. It can put a lot of pressure on your leadership team, and certainly I would say that lack of adequate attention to the well-being of your leadership team has been a problem. So we have at points seen some revolving doors of CEOs or senior execs in organisations where they haven't perhaps felt backed by their board with some of the changes that they're having to manage from a leadership perspective. Those would be our most common ones.
Yes, and the board expects that the CEO is on top of everything, but the board is really sitting back and not supporting.
Okay, so that was all of our questions. Thank you for those. The next webinar, and the final one for the NDIS Success Programme, is a governance webinar on strategy, risk and impact, which will be presented by our colleague Andrew Ellis. That will be available from the 17th of November with another opportunity for a Q&A a week after that. So thank you so much for watching the programme. Do send through your questions to ndis@cbb.com.au, and we hope that you'll be joining us for our next webinar. Bye for now.
Bye.